Hi, friends. Welcome to the Proclaim Peace podcast, where we read the scripture through the lens of peacemaking. This year, we are working our way through the Old Testament and exploring ways that it can teach us about how we can be better peacemakers in our societies, homes, families, and wards. I am joined today by my co-host, Patrick Mason. Patrick, how are you doing?
I'm doing all right. How are you, Jen? How's your summer going?
I am fine. I am enjoying a heat wave here in Boston.
Same here.
Enjoying
Everywhere.
I put in, a little bit miserable. I'm a little bit tired of the heat. We were warned about this and it's here, but it doesn't make it pleasant. So today we are really excited to have a conversation with a good friend of mine, Elizabeth Davis Edwards. Elizabeth has a lot to tell us about one of the very core messages of the Old Testament, which is that we are to welcome the stranger. It's a message that comes through early in Scripture, but particularly is highlighted by the Lord over and over as he speaks to his people through his prophets after Exodus out of Egypt. And he reminds them constantly that they were strangers in the land and that they have an obligation to, I think, honor the Lord for his deliverance of them through ensuring that they make sure that the people amongst them do not also feel the tensions and pains that they felt in Egypt.
Yeah. So as we were approaching this episode, I recently went and saw the new movie, The Odyssey, with my kids. I don't know if you've had a chance to see it yet.
I have not.
There's lots of violence in it, but actually, I think there's a great message in terms of the futility of violence. And one of the themes in the movie, they call it the law of Zeus. We would call it the golden rule. Yep. But basically, that this is central to the movie, the idea of hospitality, the idea of the importance of welcoming in anybody who comes to your door, even the beggar, and then showing them hospitality, and then they in turn being good guests. And really, that's kind of one of the themes that the whole, the thematic hinge that the whole movie goes on. And what I like is that this is not just a Jewish virtue or a Christian virtue. We can find this kind of idea in lots of different traditions all around the world, but it is central to the Judeo-Christian tradition. It's central to the biblical tradition. Yep. So I think about a scripture here in 1 Kings. We could find lots of other passages that are like this throughout the Old Testament. But in 1 Kings chapter 8, it says, "Likewise, when foreigners who are not of your people Israel come from a distant land because of your name, for they shall hear of your great name, your mighty hand, your outstretched arm. When foreigners come and pray toward this house, then hear in heaven your dwelling place and do whatever the foreigners ask of you, so that all the peoples of the earth may know your name and fear you, as do your people Israel, so they may know that your name has been invoked on this house that I have built." Here's talking about the temple, right? But all these people, they've heard about it. They want to come. And it just specifically says people who are not of your people, who have heard, like, this is the opportunity to show hospitality when they come, because they've heard good things about the God of Israel, about the people of Israel. How is it that you're going to receive them when they come?
One of the things I love about that scripture is that they may know that this house which I have builded, I've got the King James version, I think you have a different one, is called by thy name. I think one of the things that is so interesting to me about that scripture is it is reminding them that you can have the temple, you can be attending the temple, participating in temple worship, but it is the way you treat the stranger in your midst that will indicate to them that this house is holy and that you have actually built it in my name and that it is reflective of God. So I think sometimes we forget that. And I really love the way you've kind of framed this in terms of ancient civilizations, because I think that one of the signs that we are straying from kind of these core religious values is often how we treat the stranger, how individualistic we have become, how legalistic we've become in terms of whether we determine that someone is worthy of our attention, time, and care. And our guest today has done a beautiful job through her life and through the work that she professionally does to remind us all and of our duty to the stranger and reintegrate those people into our lives in seamless ways that allows us to build communities where that line between, I don't even know what the opposite of the stranger is, but the person who was there first and the stranger that has come in their midst starts to really blur and they become all part of one family.
I have to say, to me, this has been a theme that we've heard repeatedly from church leaders in recent years.
Yes.
As there's been just a global wave of refugees. I specifically remember this in the mid 2010s. I think it was around 2015. Elder Patrick Kieran, he wasn't yet a member of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles. He was, I think, area president in Europe that was receiving waves of refugees from the Middle East, from Syria and from other places. And he gave this incredible talk about the experience of church members in Europe receiving these people. But then he said, and this is a line that I'll always remember, he says that their story, the refugees' story, is our story as Latter-day Saints, right? That is our history. That's who we were. We're recording this episode really close to Pioneer Day. You know, this part of our story of people being driven from their homes, being driven out from the places that they attended, the homes that they had built, the fields that they had plowed, leaving things behind and going to new places because of persecution, because of violence. And then what does it look like? And we have stories from our past where people welcomed us in with open arms, like in Quincy. We have other stories from our past where people did not. We have stories from our past where we welcomed in other people, and sometimes where we weren't always good hosts or good guests.
Yeah.
And so this is part of our story. It's part of our heritage. So it's a scriptural story, but it's part of our story as Latter-day Saints too.
Yeah, and I think I'd like to just add to that. One of the gifts of prophets, they're not fortune tellers, but they are there to help us see the arc sort of our sins sometimes. Like, they help us see where we're going wrong before we're even registering that we're going wrong. I think these these talks by not just Patrick Kieran, but other church leaders in the early part of this century were indicators that a real issue was coming down the pike, and that we as Latter-day Saints needed to have our hearts and minds prepared to respond to what was going to be an increasing refugee crisis across the globe. And the question I hope that our guest will help each of us reflect on is, are our hearts in the place that they need to be to do this work? Are we responding to the call that the Lord issued in the Old Testament and then Christ reiterated in the New Testament? And then if we are, what are we prepared to do about that? How are we prepared, as was, explained in Kings, to show that we are believers not only through our observance of the temple, but also through our observance in terms of how we care for the people that are in our midst. So we're really excited to bring to you today a remarkable guest. In her 20 years of experience in strategy, marketing, storytelling, and nonprofit leadership, Elizabeth Davis Edwards has helped Fortune 500 companies and mission-driven organizations alike drive impact. In response to the evacuation of 80,000 refugees from Afghanistan, Elizabeth, a longtime advocate for refugees, quit her job as a marketing executive and formed Welcome NST to engage communities to help resettle refugee families. Elizabeth holds an MBA from Boston University and a BS in sociology from Brigham Young University. I hope you will see what a remarkable person she is and how much her deep discipleship drives her work with refugees, and we are so grateful to have her with us. Liz, welcome to the Proclaim Peace podcast. We're so excited to have you with us.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited too.
It's going to be a lot of fun. I always have fun when I'm with you. We're going to launch with a question that we ask all of our listeners, which is simple, but also has some weight to it. How do you personally define peace?
I actually really like the concept of shalom because it's obviously refers to, something much deeper than just the absence of conflict. And I know you guys talk about that a lot. So that's not a new idea here. But I like it. I like to think of it as a way of being. So that's how I look at it.
Nice. So I know that you and Jen know each other and have worked together, but I'm just getting to know you. And many of our listeners will be just getting to know you. And so before we dive into the meat of the conversation, I wonder if you can introduce yourself a little bit to us. Tell us about who you are, what brought you into this space. Tell us a little bit about Welcome NST, what it is, how it all happened. Just give us a little bit of background so we can appreciate the great work that you do.
Sure. So my background is actually in marketing. So I'm not your typical person in the refugee resettlement space.
Mm-hmm.
I worked actually with Afghan refugees for several years, off and on, with my family. We did these things that we call adventures, like Edwards Adventure, because marketing. I have to brand everything. We've got merch, So we would find something in the world where we wanted to make an impact. And when I say in the early days, when I say we, it was mostly me because my kids were little. That changed over time. But we would find an organization that was doing something about that thing. We'd reach out to them and then we would find out what they needed. We'd raise money at home, and then we'd travel to that place to help implement whatever it was. So we did that for many years. When my youngest daughter was like 3 when we first started this, and now she's 19. So in that context, we worked with Afghan refugees in a refugee camp in Greece. That camp was full of 650 Afghans, and so we came to know those families. We went back there and helped them with, raise money for different projects like a computer lab and things like that. And it was amazing. Those friends that we made during that time frame as a family completely changed us. I don't know that we changed them as much as they changed us, but knowing them, hearing their stories, walking alongside them for some short period of time was absolutely transformative for me and for my family. We still have pictures of them all over our house. The heartbreaking piece was that we would always leave. Right? We have our U.S. passports, and we just kind of jump on a plane, and we would leave, a warehouse of things or whatever, a computer lab behind, and then we would go home to our super cushy life, and they would be stuck in that camp with still the same place, nowhere to go, no way to work, no way to move their lives forward, and it was wildly unfair. And we would tell stories of those families to the people who donated money to the project. And I just wish so badly the people would say, "Oh, you guys are amazing." And I'd never had the words to explain how it sounds so trite. "Oh, we got so much more out of it." Just sounds like a silly thing to say. There was no way to really communicate that adequately. I just wished that they could have that experience. And then fast forward several years later was when the Afghan evacuation happened in 2021. Is like the rest of the country. I was watching these Afghans that looked a lot like our friends clinging to the outside of planes as they were taking off into the sky, so desperate to get to freedom somewhere else. And it was just a moral imperative, to find something I could do. I mean, there was no option for me. So I had a network of people who'd engaged at a national level. I reached out to a couple folks. One of them was Larry Tobin from the Shapiro Foundation. And I said, what's happening and what do we need? And this was just as the Kabul was falling. And he said, they're deciding how many people to put on those planes in part based on how much community support we're going to have when they get here. Because we know we don't have the infrastructure within the resettlement system to absorb, 80,000 people in a fairly short period of time. So I was just about to leave to drive my middle daughter across the country to go to BYU. I was literally leaving the next. I said, "Can this wait until Monday?" And he said, "No." So I just started reaching out and, getting the word out and saying, we're going to do this thing. It's probably the world's shortest branding exercise. It took about 3.5 minutes. And I said, we're going to start forming these things called neighborhood support teams, or NSTs. And every NST is going to raise money, and we didn't know how much, find housing and welcome one family into their neighborhood. And that's what we did. And in that very short period of time, we had 1,500 people step up.
Wow.
And they welcomed 400 Afghans into their neighborhoods. So for me, while there's a lot of commentary and all understandable around the realities that around that evacuation and the process and the mess of it all, for me, it was like the parting of the Red Sea of immigration. Just the very idea that many Afghans in a short time could suddenly get out of Afghanistan and get to the U.S. and have a chance to exercise agency over their own lives and their families was just a miracle. To me, it was a miracle. So, and of course, the other thing that we saw and we'd seen many times before in our other projects was how much people just were waiting. They just wanted to be part of it. They wanted to do something and they just didn't know what to do. We didn't have to twist people's arms. They were looking for something to do and they just jumped in. So that's our start. And we since then have grown, and we started welcoming Ukrainians in the context of the war in Ukraine. And then we pivoted to Guatemalans and Haitians, and really everywhere where there was a legal pathway open for private citizens to welcome refugees into this country, which is new for the U.S. So we were really at the cutting edge of a lot of that effort, and it's been a wild ride all along. And now, since today, we've welcomed, I think to date, we're almost to 1,500 refugees, and we've engaged over 5,000 people across 38 states.
Amazing.
So, Liz, part of the reason we wanted to talk to you today was we're obviously reading the Old Testament through a lens of peacemaking. And one of the most critical origin stories, once you kind of get through, once the children of Israel get into bondage, the most critical origin story of this people is the way God brings them out of bondage, that the way he brings them out of slavery. But they are strangers in a strange land for decades. And I think one of the things that has struck me as I'm rereading the Old Testament is this constant reminder, Jehovah, like reminding his people, I brought you out of, you were a stranger. I brought you out of Egypt. You need to now welcome the stranger. He absolutely never lets them off the hook. And so I'm wondering if you could talk to us a little bit about that today, about why do you think God asks Israel to remember that? Why does he ask them to remember not just what happened to them, but what it actually felt like to be a stranger, and then ask them to transcend sort of the horrible origin story and the violence of their origin through actually welcoming people who themselves have been subject to violence and displacement?
I love that. I love that question. I think maybe first it's probably good to just define the stranger. Obviously, there are lots of ways we can slice that. To me, it's a person who's outside of their community and therefore is vulnerable, right? So when you think of these people that came, the Afghans that I was talking about, where we all started, where Welcome NSC started, is they left their people. Like they left all their people. That's always the hardest part, right? It's not the cars, the houses, or the whatever, stuff in your house. It's the people. You leave your people, and then you're literally in a place that you don't have people, right? And even when those of us who haven't had to leave things, our people behind, have a hard time really understanding what that would feel like. I know I do. So if you think about that, like one of the striking commonalities across Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, right, is this tradition of welcoming the stranger. And it's all kind of rooted in Abraham, the story of Abraham in Genesis 18, where he shows up, and it's the chapter right after he's received the Abrahamic covenant, where he and Sarai are promised that while they're old and childless, that they're going to become, mother and father of nations, which certainly felt impossible, right?
Impossible, yeah.
Like, how would you possibly explain that, right? So in the very next chapter, Abraham has these three men show up at the door, and he doesn't know who they are, but he runs to them and he welcomes them and he feeds them and he washes their feet, and Sarah makes them cakes, and they welcome them with great honor. And ultimately, he finds out that they're holy. Joseph Smith translation calls them angels, right? So this is the story that whether across these three major religions all reflect back on that story. And I mean, to your point, Jen, like obviously one of the reasons that we're asked to welcome the stranger is it's a call to humility, right? And gratitude, to remember that we ourselves were once strangers, right? We are the debtors, right? So it's certainly that. And that's a really important part of it. It's also a call to compassion for your fellow travelers, right? Just to remember to be kind and to recognize people's suffering and to care. But I think maybe even more than anything else, and this is also echoed, of course, in Matthew and the New Testament, it's a reminder that the holy sometimes comes in disguise, right? That the people that show up at our doorstep that might look like beggars, that might look like less than, actually might be something really, really important that we really need. And I love where Sharon Eubank says that we are all rich and we are all poor in some way. And my experience in getting to know families abroad and also those who have made it here, they are experiences of holiness. Getting to know people who have the kinds of experiences I can only imagine and have come through with their faith in a better day, faith in God intact. We have a lot to learn from those people.
So I love that, Liz. And I think that particularly in our society right now, we are watching our peace be fractured because we have voices in our society that are claiming that the other are the opposite of holy, that they are vermin or they are, less than. And to me, that fractures peace, right? It breaks this covenant that we have with our fellow travelers. And I love the way you're inviting us to flip that right on its head and to say, no, not only are these people not vermin or are they not less than us, they actually are holy. They are actually have the potential to be transformative for us in terms of our relations with them, and our experiences with them can be sacred. So I just wanted to put a pin in that. I think it's a really gorgeous way to reframe how we approach the stranger. Not just that they're of worth and of value, but that they actually can be something incredibly sacred that invites us into holy spaces.
Yeah, I think I agree, Jen. I think that a lot of the times compassion is just the doorway, right? We have compassion for someone, we see their suffering, and we show up because we feel something. But then what happens next is where the magic really is, right? It's this. For lack of a better word, it's love, right? It's a kindred, spirit, where we find that common ground. And we see ourselves in them and them in us. Mother Teresa said that if we have no peace, it's because we have forgotten that we belong to each other. And I love that. And I think we find that today. And I think when we hear the rhetoric and we see the conflict and the divisiveness, we have to ask ourselves, who profits from that? Because it's none of us. None of us profit from that. Maybe somebody, but it's certainly not us. So I think it's as Christians, it's our responsibility to rise above that and to take a higher look and a broader look at what's really happening here. I think that's what God is inviting us to do in the Old Testament.
I love the way that you've grounded this both in the experience. Tracing it all the way back to the beginnings of the Abrahamic covenant, right? This is at the very heart of what it means to be a covenant people with God, all the way up through Jesus's teachings, right? In Matthew 25. I suspect that a lot of people sort of feel this way. That they've read those scriptures, they've heard this, but there's also this, quiet or sometimes not so quiet voice that says, well, like, how much is too much, right? Are there limits to welcoming the stranger? God may have infinite resources, but I don't. Debates about nations' borders and all these kinds of things. I'm sure you've wrestled with this. How do you think about this in terms of where does compassion, where does the obligation that we have towards others run up against some kind of just natural limits? Obviously, there's political limits, right? The nations create laws about who can come in and out, but it's about resources. It's about all those kinds of things. How have you wrestled with that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. There are really important conversations to be had around immigration, right? I don't think you'll talk to anyone in this. I know you won't talk to anybody in this space who would disagree with that. Everybody knows the immigration system needs to be changed. Right. It's old, it's outdated, right? That's not news, and that's not divisive, actually.
Right.
Right.
It's the one thing we all agree on.
I really do. Yeah. Look there, we got some common ground. And I think so that aside, I think the question to me is, for policymakers, the question is what is the right way to do that, right? Right. So for people and also for voters, right, to think about what is the right way to remake our immigration system in a way that reflects our current needs and our current economy, that's modern and speaks to today's realities, right? So that's a very, very valid conversation, and I think everyone I've ever talked to is eager to have that. It is having that conversation actively, right? So, but the divisiveness is doesn't usually come about like actual policy conversation. It comes focused, to your point, on othering. That's maybe that's not the right word, but just taking a group of people and making them not valid, not valuable, right? It's not necessary to see them as humans. And as Christians, we should all take issue with that. Because literally opposite of what we're called to do as Christians. We are called, there are two main commandments. It's pretty simple, right? Our call is to love God and love each other. So policy decisions are absolutely valid, but how we act on a day-to-day basis and how we see other people is, to me, fairly clear-cut. And I think the Bible does a great job outlining what we're expected to do and how we're expected to act as Christians who are seeking to live our lives more like Jesus Christ.
So, Liz, I think the way Patrick framed this question is sort of endemic of the way that we think about immigration and refugee resettlement, that this is something that is, sits at the purview of policymakers in Washington, that the resources should come from there, the processes should come from there, all the gateways should be dependent on them. And one of the things that I'm so interested in having our readers understand is the way you sort of flip that model on its head, and that you refuse to say, well, the limits will be imposed on us by the nation state. Obviously, you'll observe the laws. You only bring people who are cleared as refugees and come in legally. But you've set up a whole different way of caring for those people that seems to me to indicate that the only limits to the number of people that we can bring in are the limits that we as individuals are willing to come together to care for them and kind of support and sustain them. So I'd love to have you share a little bit about the superpower that you found in communities, this superpower that you found that people were willing to welcome the stranger, and tell us a little bit more about what you think it teaches us about the role that ordinary people can play, separate from policy, separate from government funding, to create peaceful communities and peaceful societies where the stranger is not just welcome, but becomes part of the fabric of the community.
Yeah, that's a great question, Jen. So, I think it's actually a fairly easy concept. The idea of a neighborhood support team is based on really just two basic principles. One is that communities are actually made and meant to do this work. If you think about the value of your community in your life, we can all think of times when something's gone wrong, right? Things have devastatingly gone wrong in I think everybody's life at some point, right? And multiple points. And your community shows up. Like, it doesn't necessarily mean that they fix everything. And in the worst cases, there's nothing to fix, right?
It's not fixable.
It's
right?
not fixable, right? But we all, I think every one of us, if we spoke about a time when people showed up at a time when we were at our lowest of lows, we would have a hard time articulating it because it was so important and so meaningful, so transformative to us, even though at face value, it changed nothing, right? It didn't solve anything. We weren't, all of a sudden we're not grieving. That's not the way it works. But the
Didn't
idea,
bring back the dead, right?
Yeah,
Didn't
it
make
doesn't,
cancer go away. Yeah.
It doesn't work like that. But having somebody care and listen and cry with you and hug you and walk with you in those hardest of moments is everything. That is what communities are made to do. And when we think about, the superpower of community, it's really, the concept is welcoming someone who's on the outside, right? So where their struggle is their struggle, right? Though people, they don't have their community there, right? So there's no one to show up and walk with them and help them think through what could happen next. Who can we call? Like, who do we know, right? All the things that we do for each other. And you bring them into the inside where their struggle becomes our struggle. And that is what communities do all the time. It's not a new idea. We do it all the time. If you think about your church community, your neighborhood, your school community, wherever you're really engaged, whoever you play pickleball with, I don't know, like whoever are your people, your family too, right? So it's really based on that concept and the belief, as I said before, that everyone is rich and everyone is poor in some way. So it's not a one-sided street, right? It's a two-way street where you end up better than you were when you started. The whole community is benefited, from that from broadening the stakes, from broadening the tent and making room for one more, right? That is what the superpower of community is, and it's what communities do all the time. So that at the core of the neighborhood support team, I really like this quote from Gregory Boyle, who I love. He said, "Our common human hospitality longs to find room for those who are left out." I think it's who we are meant to be And I think that that's where the whole concept of welcoming the stranger in the Old Testament, it's just building on something that was already built in to begin with. And so we're neighborhood support team. We're just piggybacking on a very fundamental principle.
So I'm sure Patrick will have a thoughtful question to follow up with this, but I just want to say that I had the opportunity to be a very small part of one of these neighborhood support groups, and watching a group of people welcome a fragile family, right? And at a point of significant crisis in their lives where this particular family had suffered a pretty significant economic fall by needing to leave Afghanistan. It wasn't that they were coming to America and their life was going to be economically better. In fact, it was quite the opposite for them. And having this community gather around and work with them and become friends with them, I think that was the most important thing. They weren't serving them. They were just, to your point, just being family, friends, and sort of repairing that torn fabric in their lives. It has been such a privilege to watch this family thrive. They're thriving economically. They're thriving socially. They have now since moved to be nearer to other Afghan families that they know. And I guess I just want to leave with our listeners the idea that this actually works, right? That this way of welcoming the stranger into communities, just in the same way that you would do that work with your ward or with your family or with someone you knew, actually bears extraordinary fruit.
Yeah, I'm so glad you shared that, Jen. It reminded me of another story. We had a family move into a town nearby, and the mom was pregnant and due in like a few weeks after she got here. And she went to the hospital when she was in labor, and the team lead went with her. And she had her baby, and she was on FaceTime with her mom and her sisters. If you know anything about the Afghan community, it's very tight. The women, I mean, typically live very close together. They're together all the time. There's a lot of, interconnection. We're kind of like, oh, we're adulting. We moved across the country. That's how it works. And typically in Afghanistan. So, she was talking to her mom and FaceTime. She just had her baby, this like pivotal moment in her life. And her mom's in tears because her daughter is alone. And she said, I'm just so sad because you're all alone. And she said, Kathy's here. Kathy's my family. And Kathy was the team lead. It's true. It was really true. And it was a beautiful example to me of exactly what you're saying, Jen, which is this transformative. It starts with service. Like it starts with compassion. It starts with feeling somebody's pain and saying, I can do something about this. I can make room in my life, but it then becomes something altogether different and holy that we get to be a part of.
That's so incredible. And I'm sure you could multiply that by 1,500, right? In terms of those kinds of stories. It reminds me, I immediately think of the idea of sealing in our faith, that obviously we have an ordinance around that, and it's focused now on marriages and on families. But when Joseph Smith first thought about it and talked about it, there was this sense that like the human family, it was originally one family, right? We were all sons and daughters of God. We're all descendants of Adam and Eve, but we've broken apart in lots of different ways. And the Bible's full of those stories. The scriptures are Tower of Babel, Nephites and Lamanites, right? It's all, the scriptures are full of these stories of fracture and the ways that we've broken apart. But with primarily with Christ's atonement, but also this idea of sealing, right? That this is a big part of what our faith is all about, is like bringing the family back together. And now, again, we ritualize it in certain ways, but it seems like what you're talking about, it's kind of a different kind of sealing. You're not doing ordinances, with people. I know that. But when Kathy is there with that woman, right, that is sort of like resealing God's family back together. Right.
Yeah, I love that.
So how do you think, and we all have a role to play in this, secular, religious, government, non-governmental, but as you've worked, what unique role do you think faith communities and faith actors have to play in this work? Yeah.
90% of the people who start neighborhood support teams are people of faith. And I define faith, or, at Welcome NST, we define faith as a belief in something hoped for but not seen. So that could take a lot of forms, right? But these are people who believe in something they can't see. that they hope will be true. And they're willing to put their shoulder into it. So we have people from every major religion all the time who lean into this work. And it's because of exactly this shared fundamental belief that we're talking about here. Not only is it a responsibility, but it's a privilege. And I also want to add to your point. I love, Patrick, your point about this kind of thought connection to the ceiling idea. There's this really beautiful quote from Gerald Cassé, who said, "The gathering of God's elect from the four corners of the earth is taking place not only by sending missionaries to faraway countries, but also with the arrival of people from other areas into our own cities and neighborhoods. Many, without knowing it, are being led by the Lord to places where they can learn of him and his gospel." So I think, like kind of looking at that really, really, really big picture, we're talking about the gathering, and we're talking about what is our part as people of faith and particularly as members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. What is our part in this huge, huge plan that we can't get our heads around, right? I think our part is welcoming the stranger. It doesn't mean you have to welcome a family who just arrived. It just means you have to make room in your heart and in your life for more people, right? And you have to look for those people who are strangers, who are on the outside without a community to wrap around them. And you don't have to look very far.
I had a stake president once who I swear every stake conference, no matter what he was speaking about, somehow he always came back to this line where he says, "There's always room for one more," right? And whether it's a dinner table, whatever it is, right? There's always room for one more. And it sounds like that's all you're asking. It's like, can you make room in your heart and your life for one more? You don't have to do it all. Can you do it for one?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, and I think what we're gathering people to, whether we openly acknowledge it or not, isn't just a covenant relationship with God, but it's Zion, right? It's a Zion community. Right. And one of the things that strikes me is the populations that you're working with. I mean, I appreciate that you have invited us all to do this wherever we are, kind of to lift where we stand and to welcome people however we do that. But your work is with people who are specifically fleeing the antithesis of Zion, right? They are fleeing violence. They are fleeing persecution. They are fleeing war. Their lives are not just not optimal. They have imploded with disruption and pain. And I'm wondering if you could share with our listeners how that has sharpened your desire to build Zion and how it has helped you personally move past and through some of the human fears about welcoming strangers. Like, how I think one of the biggest impediments to Zion really is fear. We're afraid of people who are different than us, and we don't know how to accommodate them. And you touched a little bit this on the beginning, but how has your work helped you move past that fear? How do you think what can you share with those of us that haven't moved past that fear but would like to? And how have hearing the stories of these people that have lived in places of great conflict reinforced your determination to be what I think is a peace builder? Liz, I think you are a peacemaker. That's what your work is. It is creating peace, right, in communities.
Gosh, I hope so. That'd be nice. That'd be great. Jen, I think that the answer is strikingly simple. And I think it's getting to know the humans behind, really it's getting to know the people, right? I mean, it's all rhetoric and this and, perspective and
scary
opinion.
In the abstract.
Yeah. And when you're, Jen, I've heard you talk about, being proximate in the past. And I mean, that's really what this opportunity looks like. When I was in that refugee camp, our first trip, the first person that we met was named Tamir. He welcomed us. We were walking around and not sure. We're like, I remember getting there, and my kids were by 3 girls, and I hadn't really thought this part through. We raised the money and did the thing. And I got there, and I was like, oh, maybe they don't like us. Like, I don't know.
I'm gonna set my preteen girls loose.
I'm like, my little girls are running around. I'm like.
With a community that might not be so fond of us.
I know, maybe was this really a good idea? So we looked and the people were kind of looking at us, and it seemed like they were kind of staring and scowling. And I was like, oh dear, I didn't think they might hate us. Like, it didn't even cross my mind. So in those early moments that didn't last for like 20 minutes, but I remember that short time very clearly because I really wondered if I'd made a huge mistake. And
it was fear, right? You felt fear.
Right.
Yeah.
I was like, these people might really hate us, and we're going to be, what am I going to do about the girls? Like, anyway, so Tamir came out and welcomed us, and he was so welcoming and loving and made us feel comfortable and introduced us around and kind of gave us a tour. And, the woman who ran the camp was in a meeting, so she wasn't there right when we got there. And so he just kind of took us under his wing and just made us, he invited us in. Like, we became one of that community while we were there because we were invited in by somebody who was already inside. And, we later found out, much later, he invited us to come to his tent for dinner, which, as you can imagine, feels wrong, right? You're like, you're going to use your small amount of food that you're going to make in your tent and give it to my family who has more snacks in our car than, that we know what to do with, right? Like,
we brought granola bars.
Honestly, I'm like, so you really just want to be like, we're good. But that's not how it works, because the Afghan culture is, I don't think there's another culture that's better than the Afghans at welcoming the stranger. Like, you show up, you can't just show up and drop something off. Jen, you can appreciate this, right? You show up and it's food and
You're
tea,
in.
sitting down, and like, and we're like, I only have 10 minutes, like they're ready for a 3-hour engagement, and that's how it was at the camp. And everywhere we went, people were feeding us, which initially my knee jerk was like, no, we're good, and then I realized that's how it works. Like, if you want to be part of the community and you want them to be part of you, you have to show up and you have to let them welcome you, right? You have to receive. And so that was our job a lot of the time. And anyway, so Tamir, I later found out, we went to his house, or his tent for dinner, and they made us extravagant meal, which somehow, and we found out that back in Afghanistan, his son had been brutally murdered by the Taliban in retribution for. He was 3 years old, in retribution for a brother who was an honest policeman who refused to kidnap tourists for money and working in coordination with the Taliban. So, Jen, to your point, thinking about how do we get beyond that fear, and how do we find ourselves on a higher plane, just get to know the people. It speaks for themselves. It gets you there. It's if your heart is listening and your mind is open, you will know what to do, because it's just it's actually how we're built.
So I assume there are people listening right now, including myself, who would say, okay, I don't know any refugees in my neighborhood right now. So the question is, where do I start?
Yeah, I would say that, you could always, we do have a program in Salt Lake right now where we're identifying refugee families. We're matching them with NSTs. We're working with the state of Utah to identify those families. We figure out, kind of work with the state and with the families to identify specific goals and things where they need some help, kind of getting from barely surviving to thriving. So that's one way. Go to welcomenst.org and fill out an interest form, and someone will call you and talk to you about what we're doing in Salt Lake and how you can get engaged. Another way, one of our partners in Utah is called the Utah Refugee Connection. They're also in Salt Lake. They're awesome. They do great work, and they have more discrete projects. The NST is a little bit of a longer term commitment. So it's like a few months where you're committing to work with this family and just getting to know them, inviting them into your life. Like we're talking about, you're invited into theirs, and kind of walk with them on their path for a few months. But Utah Refugee Connection does, they have a whole backpacks kind of a day, right? So you can go and do like a 1-day discrete project with your family. And then I also would say that you just find a family that's newly arrived in your area and invite them over. Find a way to get to know them, right? Maybe it's somebody you see passing you on the street. Maybe it's somebody that shows up at your ward building. Just get to know them. Ask them how they're doing in the context of all the policy shifts today, and let them know that you care and that you're concerned. And again, I think when you start to have those conversations, your heart will take over, and you'll know what to do next.
Perfect.
So before we ask one final question, I'm going to ask a next to last question. Immigration is such a flashpoint right now. It is a discussion. Even refugee resettlement is fracturing our peace. And so there are going to be people whose response is the best way to stop this peace, this fracturing of our peace societally and nationally is to stop immigration and stop refugee resettlement, right? It's not, instead of looking inward and saying, is this an us problem? They're going to say, oh no, we just need to not bring people in because that's what's sort of breaking the system. How can you encourage people to get beyond that? How do you think of your work as actually being productive of peace and reducing conflict rather than in response to the people that say, oh, you're just introducing conflict into our society. By bringing in different people, by bringing in people who don't think like we do, you're introducing conflict. You're the problem. How do you respond to that? And how do you take a stand for saying, no, that the work I'm doing is actually peace building?
Yeah, that's a great question too. So there's a lot of argument around the economic benefit of having immigrants in the country and how, our country has been built on the backs of immigrants. But I think that's not going to get us there. Because we can all choose our facts, and there are facts on either side of that argument. I guess I would have to, where I'm coming from. So I a couple of weeks ago, I had the chance to sit down with a Haitian faith community. And I spoke with them and their pastor and heard their questions and their concerns around the policies that were impacting them today. And they were heartbreaking. These are people that are here legally, and they
have nothing to go back to.
They have nothing to go back to. It's absolutely heartbreaking. And the question I got more often than not was, if I get detained or deported, who's going to help my kids? Can you help me with that? Who's going to take care of my kids? And I think, to me, the answer and again, there are two parts of this conversation. One is immigration policy, which should be a conversation about immigration policy, not about the value of human beings, right? If you're talking about the value of human beings, you've got to get to know the human beings. I have never met, I'm a faithful member of I like to think of myself as a faithful member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I have never met a more faithful people than I have when I've sat with the Haitian faith community. These are people that have looked the impossible in the eye and time again have believed that God will make a way out of no way. And you could look at that and think that's pretty naive, because look at all the things that have happened to you. Or you can look at that and say, you know what? They know something that I don't know.
These are exactly the people we need, right?
And to me, that's the only way to have that conversation. It's got to be, there's a policy conversation, and then there's a human conversation, and everything else is manufactured to divide us.
Yeah, and sometimes we put those two conversations in the wrong order. Well, Liz, this is incredible. I'm so inspired by your work. So grateful for what you're doing. But I've got to imagine it's got to be hard a lot of times. It's got to feel crazy sometimes, and you're pulled in lots of different directions, and probably sometimes heartbreaking. So in the midst of all of that, how and where do you find peace? That's
a really good question these days. I know we all struggle with that. It's such a challenge. There's so much noise. So for me, yes, it is really hard. I think, and that's not just me. That's everybody today. I think it's hard to shut down the noise and find the peace. It's at times absolutely deafening. And there are heartbreaking stories everywhere you turn. So for me, it's finding peace is a daily practice. I think you guys have interviewed Zeke Hernandez before. I actually ran into him last week, and we were talking about how there's this high divine space where God lives, right? That we try to kind of zoom out and remember, and this is what I do, and I'm sure others as well, try to remember who's really in charge. Remember where the power really lies. And to me, there's so much peace in remembering that, and remembering that what we're seeing right now is just a moment. It's just a snapshot and a moment in time, and the power is God's. And then there's the other side of that, right? There's the grassroots, down at the day-to-day level. And it's thinking two pieces of that. One is what can I do about it? What can I do today? What's on my plate that I can lean into and where I can focus my energy in a positive way? And what's on my plate, but also what do I get to do? What do I have the privilege of doing today? What am I lucky enough to be able to do. And then I think the other side of that is watching what other people do. And one thing that I haven't said yet, which I should have, and you, Jen, you asked about, what the role is that people of faith are playing. People are doing this everywhere all the time. And I think sometimes we look at the news and it's easy. The news is in the middle. It's the noise, but sometimes we look at that and we think that's the whole story, and it's also divided and ugly. I would invite everyone to look around you and let what's happening right around you in your neighborhood, in your ward community, let that be your first source of news. Not necessarily your only source of news, but your first source. Look around you and see the good things that are happening. That is real. And to me, it's so beautiful. I mean, I have this incredible privilege to be able to see these good people of faith all over the country doing good things just because they want to, because they are driven to do something
making
for someone
them.
else.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's not, I mean, from the forefront, it looks like there's nothing in it for you. Now, it turns out there is, but that's not the reason people are doing it, right? People are doing it because they have empathy and because they have compassion and because they have charity, and it's happening everywhere all the time. It's certainly not just the Welcome NST. Welcome NST is one sliver of that reality. And I think it's so crucial to look around you and just count the good things that are happening when you go to the grocery store and somebody's nice to you and holds the door, or you see somebody being nice to a mom who's overwhelmed with a lot of kids and juggling things. And it happens always, So I think to me, it's the peace is in zooming out, remembering where the real power really lies, and then focusing on your own and the power of others that's being exercised to help God accomplish at a very, very tiny way this great big plan that he's got going on.
Incredible.
Thank
you, Liz. That's fantastic.
Thank you,
Absolutely
guys.
beautiful. Thanks for listening to this episode of Proclaim Peace. To hear more, you can subscribe on a podcast app of your choice or on YouTube. You can always find full show notes or transcriptions at proclaimpeace.org.
Proclaim Peace is a partnership between MWEG and Waymakers. You can learn more about Waymakers at waymakers.us. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next time.